Good morning, Miss and Sir. Let me introduce myself. My name is Gozali as a student in Binus University from Visual Communication Design major. Will presenting paper about sexual education through online comic as named Medusa Miraculous Education Sexual. For the background, as several years, there are so many cases about sexual abuse and sexual harassment. Looking up to WHO, these cases form can be insisting considered forms of sexual violence under the criminal code. Sexual assault harassment can also include catcalling, tailing, and constant stalking. Not a few people who do not know this fact and thus powerless to ask help when the incident occurred. This knowledge can be appear because the education of sexual assault still on low point. There are two reasons why sexual education must be implemented and represented on public. The first is the generalized lack of interest in sexual violence. This lack of comprehension is a result of some parents' inability to communicate openly. The second point is still related to the first one, which is that the quantity of reading somehow doesn't decrease the attraction of text explanation of sexual education, leading to the creation of an option product in the form of online comics. This research examines the inclusion of sexual education topics by explaining ways education is delivered through visual arts more attractive. And the main issues here that discuss is public knowledge about sexual education. There are ways that should be applied to deal with this issue of sexual education in society. At first is to implement a socializing campaign to educate the public about the importance of sexual education. This solution starts to intend to increasing sexual education around public. This suggests that most people's knowledge of sexual education is still below the average. And for the solution, the online comic and the campaign was the initial thing that came to my mind as the solution to help solve the issue that had come up. The study said that use of the visual media in the form of comic books increases efforts of knowledge. This is proved by the high development of reading interest in visual rather than textbooks. Seeing this opportunity, there is a chance that the online comic market will be accepted by public by bringing stories that are educative enough. And so what's the difference? The differences between the common comic with this prototype that are the first, any kind of books or such educational media that provide the sexual harassment content, not showing the more detail about the cases. The cases, for example, kind of general. It is alright for using the general cases, but it makes some of us bored. People need some typical specific for discussion. And based on the problem, this comic will generally use one popular cases among another cases to blowing up as the comic story. And the second thing was make the sensitive content in a way does not the often or traumatized victim who want to read this comic. So for the quantity methods, based on the diagram beside shows that people choose comics as their favorite visual media. The conclusion that can be drawn for the current solution project will be a comic with a simple storyline with slice of life, genre, and the main focus material being based on the result from the questionnaire. And for the new and the popular case on public nowadays was children abuse. The pedophilia abuser was commonly can be looking up around us. This one case is concerning enough, moreover, for family that have younger child. From this questionnaire, that main plot of comic will be created and using the child abuser for the main story. For the quality methods, from two people who get interviewed, the first people as student from university telling some his knowledge about sexual education things. As long as he became a student, he can conclude that most people, including him, more like comic as matter education because it's more understandable than read the newspaper or any manual books. And the second is Mrs. X. She was a student from university too and tells some her knowledge about sexual education. She feel as the victims from sexual cases, she feel the opinion about every people must need to know about sexual education in the early age. As a victim, she said, if using some people a real story for the comic, it is fine. It not will affect it to her trauma experience. And the recap for interview, sexual harassment crimes commonly occurring as a result of society's ignorance of the issue and also the assumed learning about sexual education, which is considered a taboo thing. This material educate is needed to raise awareness of the importance of prevent sexual harassment cases. The interviewer agreed on the beginnings to make comics for delivering sexual education through various plot and story illustration, since the majority of individuals despise reading and prefer to be intrigued of visual. For the process to making the prototype was the begin for making the visualization of the character. The name of our lead character was Yusa. The Yusa character in the story is described as a teenager with short green curly hair and mostly green clothing. The uses of green color palette is to illustrate Yusa's protagonist character in the story. Aside from that, the color green represents good things that lead the positive and kindest things, and the color representing pretty much identical to Yusa's character in the story. And Yusa's name came from mythology Yunnan character named Medusa. The story behind Medusa was getting raped with Poseidon was the reason the Medusa became a character reference for this comic. The plot of the story in the first chapter that will be Yusa's scene with one younger child who wanna get raped but Yusa save her. And after that, Yusa asking her go to the safest place and continue with the second chapter when the younger child sit with Yusa and she tell the story that she have been get raped before. And Yusa feels he get the deja vu thing because Yusa have the same cases a long time ago. And this was the final excuse. The comic became black and white for making it as simple as possible. And after this main comic, there will be a mini comic that insisting of education, sexual, but more in the simple ways. This is the platform that used to be media delivered to public was Instagram. Besides here, there was a mock-up for Instagram account, which is the content containing the comics, poster of sexual harassment campaign, and there's some activity from the highlight that will be giving more information about sexual education through humanity activity. The conclusion about all of these projects are the primary issue in the huge amount of sexual violence that takes place. Starting with this issue, a reason for the rapidly increase was eventually determined. After analyzing the data research, it was discovered that most people didn't get sexual education lesson at the proper or in early age. Based on the final result obtained as a solution to the problem of rising levels of sexual violence, that will be online comic that can be used to deliver sexual education, especially to the general public. This comic that going up through the Instagram will be carried out directly so that audience is not overly tense while reading but can still learn about sexual education easily. After the entire comic is complete, it will be present to the public on Instagram. There was a hope this comic will eventually be published each week to increasing popular knowledge about sexual education. And that's all for my presenting today. Thank you for attention.